where current events meet culture.
Get It Right with Margaret Hoover.
Welcome back to Get It Right. This is Margaret Hoover, and we are going to turn our attention now to a real passion issue of mine, education reform. No secret to the listeners here at Get It Right. SiriusXM Insight Channel 121. And I was so pleased when I was going through my Twitter feed this morning to see a link to a Wall Street Journal article highlighting a friend, Campbell Brown, who has been on a guest of mine at SiriusXM prior to the conception of SiriusXM Insight, if you can believe it. Campbell Brown, this is the first time you're on Get It Right. Welcome to SiriusXM Insight.
Margaret, I'm so happy to be talking to you, and especially about this. I'm so excited. We're finally getting going here.
You are, okay, so you are an award-winning journalist. You were the 8 p.m. host at on CNN, my channel, for years. You've won awards, you covered the White House, you've covered all these, campaigns and really important sort of international issues. You were in Iraq and covering the war there. So you're like a hardcore journalist, but you have found religion, no pun intended, with education reform and have really become a total warrior on this issue. And you're starting a new project called, as the Wall Street Journal mentioned this morning, it's called The 74. What is The 74?
The 74 is for the 74 million children, American children in this country, who we believe deserve the best education possible. And Margaret, you've been working on this issue too for a very long time. There is an inequality that currently exists. And I think this all came to the fore for me when I became a mother. When I was at CNN, I had 2 children and, started thinking about this issue much more and became, acutely aware, as I think all of us do when we have children of our own, of their educational needs, of what I wanted to give them as a mother, and very aware of what, comparatively that means for a lot of other parents in this country, where, we have schools, especially in New York City where I live, but all over the country that are not getting the job done. And if you just look at the statistics, 2 out of every 3 eighth graders can't read or do math at an acceptable level. This is from 2010. Only 46% of American students finished college. And then of the 18 countries where college completion rates were measured, America finished last. We can't continue on the current path, and something has to be done about it. And to me, there's no issue more important and no issue that deserves more coverage and more attention than this one. So given the upheaval in media and journalism, it seemed like the right time to create something that would focus entirely on this issue.
Well, it's so needed. To me, it's one of my passion issues. I have, just anecdotally, Campbell, been mentoring this young woman who is a senior in high school, African-American woman. She just learned this week of her senior class, which, by the way, is a magnet school in New York, got a B rating by the Education Board. Of the 110 students in her senior class, 30 are going to graduate. She's one of them, which is exciting. But 30. This school is not a failing school, Campbell. This is a B-rated school in the New York City school system. And only 30 of 110 of their seniors are graduating.
And
so
that's shocking. It's really shocking.
Horrifying. It's horrifying. And my heart drops. So this is why I'm so glad this is sort of a cause that you've taken up. And it's certainly front and center. It's so hard to live in New York City where we both live and not sort of have your heartstrings pulled on this issue every day. I was just talking right before you to a sociologist who works with inner city poverty and the challenges of inner city. And that's what she said. She's like, we have to fix systemically education. So you're tackling it with this new project. So can you sort of give us a preview? I know the launch isn't until for a couple weeks, but
yeah,
what's the project? Yeah, tell us about it.
Well, I'll give you credit here because you were one of the very first people I talked to when I first started thinking about this almost a year ago. I can't believe it's been that long.
Gosh.
But we have been at it, me along with my co-founder, Romy Drucker, have been working on this for about a year, raising the money. It is a nonprofit, so unlike a lot of news organizations out there, they're still trying to make it in a very challenging environment. We're relying on philanthropic dollars. So between raising the money and building the right staff of people, I think we've recruited some incredible people. The site's being run editorially by Steve Snyder, who was at Time Magazine, Time.com. Magazines are sort of on their way out.
Yeah, you can call it a magazine. We all know what you mean.
Time.com and People before joining us, and he's been working with us getting this ready for a while. We have about 13 people on staff total. We have a lot of contributors. I don't know if you know, or you may remember Cynthia Tucker, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning editorial writer, editorial page director at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and she's going to be a contributor. She's a mom like me. She and I have been talking about this issue for a long time and how passionate we are about it. Connor Williams, who has written some really provocative, fascinating pieces on this subject for Talking Points Memo, is coming aboard and joining us. Richard Whitmire.
Wow, so you're collecting A-level journalists.
I know, I'm excited.
This is like the A-team.
They've done some amazing work already, which we're putting in the can for a launch that we're planning for July 13th. So very, very excited.
So a news website devoted entirely to education issues, staffed by A+ journalists from across the industry. I mean, that's what 74 is. It now? Is it the74.com? What's the actual URL?
Yeah, the 74 I'm still getting used to it. The 74million.org is the URL, and please follow us on Twitter at the 74. THE, then the number 74.
Okay.
And
we're going to tweet it out so everybody can just, everybody, you all can tweet me anytime. Everybody knows. I always say this at the top of my segments, but I forgot because I was so excited to talk to you. Tweet me at Margaret Hoover, tweet us at SiriusXM Insight, and tweet Campbell at Campbell Brown.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Campbell _ Brown, I think.
Campbell _ Brown, and at the 74, THE as 74. Okay, you're going to launch July 13th. Is that right?
Yeah. And there will be, I mean, it's a variety of stories. One thing that you and I, of an interest we share in addition to the policy pieces is politics. And there's so much excitement around the 2016 campaign. And I think for the first time, this issue has the chance to really be front and center in this presidential campaign in the way we haven't seen in the last two cycles, for a number of reasons. If you look at, the debate that's taking place around Common Core within the Republican primary campaign, if you look at some of the candidates, Jeb Bush in particular, who has taken on this issue and been very active and engaged on this issue for a very long time, he's obviously going to be pushing this issue and making it front and center as he campaigns. Hillary Clinton is going to face this challenge of which direction she will move. President Obama has been very sort of aggressive and out in front in embracing charter schools and pushing for reforms and accountability. But he didn't receive, if you remember, in 2008, the endorsement of the teachers' unions, while Hillary Clinton did. So even though she had a history of being a reformer, very reform-minded about education back in her Arkansas days, it'll be interesting to see, given that she's already on a lot of issues being pulled to the left, if education will be one of those issues too, or will she stand up and continue many of the policies put in place by the Obama administration and fight for real accountability and reform in the system? I think there's so much there. It's a rich moment for us to be covering the politics of education, in a way that we didn't in the last cycle, because there was a lot of agreement, frankly, between Romney and Obama on the issue, and there wasn't the opportunity to sort of give it that level of attention.
Well, and there's so many fissures here because even Fox News Sunday did a positive piece about Common Core last Sunday, which sort of blew my mind because so what you're starting to see is there is, as you say, so much texture of this issue on the right, on the right, frankly. And I guess there is this question of sort of where Hillary will fall. But it does give this moment, and I think you also have this sort of singular ability to help elevate this issue in the 2016 cycle. I think by this work, and I think generally you've you've been able to galvanize and sort of focus communities on this issue in really interesting ways. Like, can you tell the story about what happened with the kids in, was it in Brooklyn or was it in Queens? A bunch of moms emailed you because of a horrible situation with a teacher in their school.
Yeah, I mean, this is an example, I think, of just how broken the system really is, that something like this could happen and it not be sort of shocking front page news, because it wasn't. This is when I had sort of gotten more involved on the advocacy side as my children were entering school age. I had a kindergartner and a first grader. And one of the things that I had written about and talked about was this crazy law that exists in New York and a number of other states that will allow a tenured teacher to keep their job in some cases, even if they've been found guilty of inappropriate sexual behavior with children. I couldn't believe it was true. I've written a lot about it. I did a million FOIL requests and worked closely with the Daily News, who's covered this story a lot. That it just showed you how hard it could be to remove a teacher, even one who had definitively, without question, harmed kids. So when the school year started, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was dropping my first grader off on the first day of school, and I got a call from some parents at PS 101, a school in Queens, who said to me, because they had read about some of the things I'd written on this, that they were in a horrible, horrible situation, that they had taken their kids to the first day of school to drop them off and found out that a teacher at that school who had been found guilty of abusing children at that school had been put back in charge of a first grade class. What had happened is he had been reprimanded by the Department of Education by an arbitrator who gave him a $2,500 fine and sent him to anger management classes and then sent him back to teach first grade. Now, can you imagine if you're a mother and you arrive at school to bring your child to drop them off at that age with this person? What would you do? I mean, what would you do?
I'd email Campbell Brown. I would email Campbell Brown. So that's what they all did. No, it's horrifying.
I mean, what was so inspiring to me about this group of parents is that they did do something. They organized, they protested, they got on the phone, they made calls, they reached out to their councilwoman, they reached out to their senator, they wrote letters to the governor. They were organized and on top of this, and they got that teacher removed from the classroom. Now, they couldn't get him fired because legally he has a right to keep that job, so he's on administrative duty now. But had they not had the will to really stand up and fight, nothing would have happened at all. And unfortunately, in many schools where people don't know this is going on or feel like they're very alone and don't have that sort of community and aren't able to rally like those parents were, nothing happens. Nothing happens. And it's shocking that this goes on as much as it does in our system.
And it
totally just shows you that we've got to bring attention to these issues.
So if the $74million.org had existed when that happened, tell us, what are you going to do when that happens? Like when, X school in Atlanta or in Sacramento or in Denver, reaches out and says, hey guys, something awful's happening. What are you going to send? The journal article says you're going to focus heavily on video for storytelling. What kind of power could you leverage to tell that kind of story in the future?
So it will be a very aggressive news organization that is focused like a laser beam on things like this when they happen, but not just, let me be clear about this too, not just the negative. I mean, what's also happening is that there are incredible positive stories of teachers who are doing amazing things in the classroom, who are being innovative and are like changing the face of education. And those stories don't get told either. And look, it's not anybody's fault in a way. It's the entire business is going through this massive upheaval, and it's a moment of reinvention. And unfortunately, one of the things that's happening at the major news organizations is they're cutting way back on education reporters, and it's just getting lost. because they don't have the manpower to cover these issues, and they're not paying attention up to it nearly as much as it deserves. And I personally believe this is the future of journalism, where and I think you're seeing more and more examples of it. If you look what Bill Keller is doing with the Marshall Project, which is a single issue digital news site focused on criminal justice reform.
And
there are a
lot.
Is a nonprofit.
Run is
right,
a nonprofit.
A nonprofit. There are a lot of examples like this where people are, taking an issue that deserves coverage that it's not getting at the major news organizations that are trying to, give something to everybody, and giving it the kind of in-depth, investigative, intense focus that these issues deserve.
Well, I cannot wait to follow all this stuff, especially the caliber and the quality of writers that you have on board. You just know it's also probably a great way for young journalists to cut their teeth, to really break stories and to sort of follow leads under the tutelage of really, sort of Pulitzer Prize winning, journalists and writers. Do you have a lot of, you've got some headliners. Do you have sort of new hungry reporters that have signed up to work for you too?
We do. We have a young woman who's in Washington who's came from CQ, who's joining us, who's going to be covering Capitol Hill and a lot of the shenanigans in D.C. I should give them more credit than that, I suppose.
Well, it's okay. I think you have a sympathetic audience here. Nobody. Well, look, you're pretty safe. I think 13% approval rating. Shenanigans, no one's going to refute.
I know. And we have a team of great young reporters who are New York based, but they'll be traveling the country because this is obviously. Even though. The stories are everywhere, but there's a commonality to it. So I think in a way, if you're, talking about something that's happened in Chicago, it's very similar to the challenges that people are facing in other urban areas. If you're talking about what's going on in some of the rural communities, there is, these are not necessarily problems, even though we talk about education so much as a state issue, we are all facing very similar challenges, and the statistics reflect that. So hopefully, we will be able to put a national perspective on all of this.
Well, what I'm sure you're going to be able to do, and what I look forward to, is that there will be, a way to sort of document the outrage, the outrageous sort of travesties that are happening in these communities across the country in education. There'll also be this 2016 angle, like how can we influence the national policy discussion? But can you tell us, are you going to editorialize on where you think education should go and what you think the right policies are? Or are you going to just cover it all from a news perspective? How will that come in?
We'll do both. We have an opinion section, just like many outlets do, where, as I mentioned, Cynthia, Connor, some of the folks that we've recruited to do that specifically will be writing very clear opinion pieces. Obviously, I've been very outspoken on my point of view about a number of issues on education, and I'll be fully transparent when I talk about various issues where I stand. But there's going to be a lot of, what I hope is desperately needed in this conversation, which is just to use Common Core as an example, but there are a million examples. Look at charter schools where we aren't having a fact-based debate, where much of the information that gets pushed around about these issues is just false. It's absolutely false. And my belief, as a journalist, which has always been my belief, is that if you actually force an honest conversation, people will reach the right conclusion. But that does mean trying to make sure that you are having a fact-based conversation. And that means correcting the record and calling people out when they're, BSing us about something and they're not being honest about the facts. And so that's going to drive most of our coverage. And to be clear, we, obviously I have a clear point of view. I believe every journalist has a point of view. And I think, pretending that anyone is objective is semi-delusional. And I think journalism has evolved past that point where I think people still pretend that they can have utter objectivity. But I do think what our main focus will be is just bringing honesty and truth to the conversation. If I can say one final thing, to be clear, when I became a journalist, 100,000 years ago, it feels like.
God.
I went into journalism because I wanted to advocate for people who I felt did not have a voice. I wanted to hold accountable the people in power to ensure that they were responsive to those they're supposed to serve. It's why political journalists want to cover presidential candidates. It's why business reporters want to cover these big tycoons, to hold them accountable and make sure that they are accountable to the people they serve. And this is no different. I mean, we want to challenge the education establishment to make sure it's accountable to the parents and children that it is supposed to serve. And if there is anyone in this world who doesn't have a voice, it is the 74 million children in this country. And that's what we're trying to do. So, when people say, are you an advocate or are you a journalist? It's like, I always thought as a journalist, I was supposed to be an advocate for the people who don't have a voice in a national conversation. And so that's what we're trying to do.
So, and that's what the 74million.org will be starting on July 13th. Campbell Brown, thank you for joining us here at Get It Right. Thank you for previewing the launch, and I hope you and your really esteemed staff will come back anytime when you have great stories to tell America. This is Margaret Hoover with Get It Right, SiriusXM Insight, Channel 120.